Hello everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. I'm just doing this quick video on the Emancipation Proclamation and some of the context around it, just to give you a sense of when and how this develops and where Lincoln is at and what the intention is behind the Emancipation Proclamation. The slide that I have up on the screen is really where we ended in class today, and the really big takeaway with this slide is that in addition to Lincoln, and in addition to what becomes, by the end of the war, the 13th Amendment, which is really the Civil War Amendment or Reconstruction Amendment that enables an end to slavery, there's other efforts to try to reduce slavery. And perhaps in 1862, when the war is still kind of new, one of the places we first see initiatives against slavery, not complete eradication of slavery, but somewhat, is Congress. And so it's useful to just note that. Some examples of this include confiscation acts. We mentioned these in class a little bit today, but acts where as the Union Army comes across the Confederacy, if there are enslaved persons who are, pulled over to the Union side, they are not going to be returned as fugitive slaves. They're going to be held by the Union, kind of confiscated. And we start to see these large camps of African Americans who were at one time enslaved and become kind of, camp that's following the Union Army. So as the Union Army is moving around, we, in a sense, kind of have a bit of a refugee crisis that's forming as individuals who are enslaved come to the Union side. And this is happening in maybe small numbers initially, but something that's going to expand throughout the war. We also see an end to slavery in Washington, D.C., and an outlawing of slavery in the West, which is very significant, and that comes from Congress. Ultimately, we'll see Lincoln also act, and he is interested throughout 1862. He's drafting a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, okay? And these are things that he's thinking about. Lincoln had proposed to his cabinet about doing the Emancipation Proclamation, and some of the members of his cabinet were afraid that the Union really hadn't solidified its place on the battlefield yet, that there might not be enough credibility for the Union to enable the freeing of any enslaved persons. So some members of cabinet suggest, that Lincoln should wait. And he does wait until September. And then it's the Battle of Antietam that once that battle is over, Lincoln will use that as a victorious battle for the Union and will announce the Emancipation Proclamation. This battle, there's a few things to know about Antietam. First of all, it happens as a Confederate offensive. This is really an attempt for General Lee of the Confederacy to invade into the North to resupply. He's going to be invading into Maryland. And this would, if there was success, bolster the Confederate efforts. Antietam is noteworthy because of the staggering losses. The battle is fought on several different spaces with a variety of different Union and Confederate troops, but you can see the casualties are staggering. 12,000 from the Union side, 10,000 casualties from the Confederate side. This is killed and wounded. And, the chaos at the end of the battle, how many wounded men are still left on the battlefield. This is going to be a significant battle because it really creates so many changes in terms of medicine and in terms of how the Union, at least, is going to organize a much more efficient system for dealing with wounded soldiers. But it's just a horrific, horrific battle. It's the battle with the single most losses in a particular day. And really, the battle's a draw. There really isn't a decisive Union victory, but the Confederacy ends up retreating. And so because McClellan kind of holds the field, it appears as if the Union can claim victory. And it's maybe a little bit of a tough sell, but we get a sense that McClellan feels victorious And after this particular battle, Lincoln is going to announce the Emancipation Proclamation, at least the preliminary. And the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation is in writing, so it does get proposed to the southern states. The southern states are the audience for the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It's essentially a warning to the South, unless they stop their insurrection, there will be in the future, on January 1st, emancipation of enslaved persons who are in, areas of contention, basically areas controlled by the Confederacy. Lincoln also fires General McClellan. This is going to be a constant kind of source of conflict, Lincoln and his general. On another note, the Battle of Antietam is also really significant because it suggests, and the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, those two things together become very significant because it tips England probably more into the side of the Union. England is much more favoring the idea that the Union is now fighting for the moral cause of slavery, whereas the South is still predominantly pro-slavery. So despite the fact that England was buying a lot of the South's cotton, and it's really difficult to do that with a blockade, England is just going to switch to buying a lot of its cotton from India and from Egypt and other cotton producers. And Southern planters are going to be the ones that are really at a loss as a result of some of those efforts. But England will never really recognize the Confederacy or support the Confederacy directly. There will be ships for sale from the British to the Confederacy, but not really direct participation. And that's something that Lincoln may have been fairly strategic about. There are certainly historians who argue that Lincoln was trying to maintain, British on the Union side, maybe also trying to maintain the possibility of using enslaved persons who are coming to the Union side as soldiers. So this flip to be able to use enslaved persons, as fighting men. Some of that is also perhaps on Lincoln's mind with the Emancipation Proclamation. In any case, the other big takeaway, and we're not going to get into the specifics of all these battles, but you can see on the screen Ulysses S. Grant, who's going to be fighting a campaign at the same time McClellan is losing battles in the East in places like, trying to capture Richmond, Virginia, and failing. We see some successes for the Union, and most of these successes are for another part of that Anaconda Plan, the part where there is an interest in controlling the Mississippi River. And this is really done piece by piece by piece, but we start to see as early as 1862 some Union victories in controlling the Mississippi River. And as you noted in class, this becomes really significant because controlling the Mississippi River could split the Confederacy right in half. Alabama wouldn't be able to connect to Texas, and, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas would be completely, left out of Confederacy planning. And the Union would also control the New Orleans, the port of New Orleans. So that becomes important, right? Sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. I'm so sorry. So the capture of New Orleans becomes really significant. The United States, the Union, will do that. And not only does the Union capture the port and control exports from moving out of the South, there's also the entire control over the entire city of New Orleans. So this becomes like a military run city, and everywhere the Union goes and is successful, we start to see this type of, military control over southern cities. Okay, and that becomes a significant factor of the war. The preliminary emancipation goes out in September. The final emancipation, the Emancipation Proclamation, doesn't really get delivered until January 1st of 1863. But Lincoln gives the southern states a little bit of a heads up. Basically, the next 100 days, you have a chance to get out of this insurrection, or else Lincoln is very interested in doing an Emancipation Proclamation that he can see some enslaved persons emancipated or freed, but he wants to do it where he had never thought he had constitutional power to do this. So he does this based on war powers. He looks at his own commander-in-chief war powers, and he decides that he can act to emancipate enslaved persons only where there is Confederate control, and essentially he's acting under war powers. So he threatens the southern states: if you don't give up your insurrection in the places where there is insurrection, those places will see free enslaved persons. He also indicates that there will be compensation for states and for potentially, enslave, like basically compensating states for their enslaved persons. This is something Lincoln had long thought he would have to do in order to end slavery in the South, not in the West, but slavery in the South. And he also implies colonization. This means after the Civil War is over, that individuals who are formerly enslaved, he kind of indicates that he's in favor of sending people away to Liberia in Africa. Lincoln was long somebody who held a lot of racist views. We see this in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So despite the fact that he's interested in ending slavery, he also didn't necessarily see people as equal. And so he makes that clear on several accounts. It makes Lincoln kind of a complicated person because it's hard to know exactly which Lincoln we're getting all of the time. And some historians argue that a good part of the Emancipation Proclamation is like a military power to try to get enslaved persons to fight for the Union, and maybe to deprive the South from having enslaved persons fight. But at the same time, there also is some degree of moral change. Frederick Douglass has an influence on Lincoln. Some of his own cabinet members who are abolitionists have an effect on Lincoln. So he's kind of complicated in exactly where he is, and some of this is just indicated in private letters that he has. But let's look at the actual Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation is very, very short, and it comes out in its full form on January 1st, 1863. And I'm just going to note some of what this is about. That on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, so New Orleans, for example, New Orleans would not be able to be, slaves would not be able to be free because the Union is there. Any place within any state or a designated part of a state where the people shall be in rebellion. So wherever the Confederacy is in rebellion, then those enslaved persons are going to be called forever free. He says that he has virtue of the power in me as commander-in-chief, and he sees this as a necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion. This is the map that gives us a sense of where the Emancipation Proclamation will take place. It does not take place in the border states, where there is slavery, but not emancipation. It also does not take place in quite a few counties of Louisiana, where the Union controls, including New Orleans. And the piece of paper that I handed out today, most of the Emancipation Proclamation includes the names of every single Louisiana county, which is not included in this, kind of emancipation. And note that emancipation doesn't happen overnight. It's not like on January 2nd, everybody who's enslaved in the Confederacy is completely free. Although word does get around, some enslaved persons do find the Union Army and flee to the Union Army. Some Union Army also will meet up with enslaved read the Emancipation Proclamation. And in some cases, this is going to be months or even years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So look at Juneteenth and why it is celebrated.